There's a company with 40,000 locations in over 100 countries. It serves 69 million people every single day. It pulls in over $23 billion a year. And yet, if tomorrow it decided to stop selling burgers forever, it would still be one of the richest companies on the planet. How is that possible? Because McDonald's is not what it seems. It never was. Most people think McDonald's sells hamburgers, that its business is fast food, that it makes money every time someone orders a Big Mac. But that's exactly what McDonald's wants you to think. The truth is that McDonald's is one of the largest real estate companies in the world, with one of the most valuable property portfolios on the planet, and with a strategy so smart, so perfectly designed, it took decades to get right. Today, I'm going to tell you everything. How it started, who invented it, exactly how it works, and why this completely changes the way you look at business. Because when you finish this video, you'll never drive past a McDonald's again without thinking about what's really going on behind that drive-through window. Let's start with a number that changes everything. 95% of every McDonald's in the world is not owned by McDonald's. They're franchises, independent businesses run by regular people who pay McDonald's for the right to use its name, its menu, its brand, and its systems. Now, when most people hear the word franchise, they picture something simple. Someone pays a fee, opens a location, sells burgers, and gives a percentage of sales back to the parent company. That happens. McDonald's charges roughly 4% of gross sales from every franchise. But there's something else. Something almost nobody talks about. Something buried in the fine print of every contract McDonald's has signed for the last 70 years. The rent. Before a franchisee can open a McDonald's, someone has to secure the land or the building where that restaurant will operate. And that someone, in most cases, is McDonald's. The company finds the location, negotiates with the property owner, signs the lease, builds or renovates the space, and then subleases that same location to the franchisee at a significantly higher price. On average, a McDonald's franchisee pays between 8% and 15% of gross sales just in rent to McDonald's. Add the 4% royalty, add the marketing fees, and suddenly, the franchisee is handing McDonald's between 15% and 22% of everything they sell. Before paying employees, before paying for ingredients, before paying utilities, maintenance, or anything else. Starting to see the pattern? McDonald's doesn't make money selling burgers. It makes money charging rent to the people who sell burgers. And there's a massive difference between those two things. A fast food company depends on people being hungry, on ingredient costs staying low, on employees not demanding higher wages, on competitors not crushing their sales. A real estate company depends on something much simpler and much more powerful, the lease being in effect. And McDonald's leases typically run for 20 years. But to understand how they got here, you have to go back to the beginning. And the beginning is not where most people think. The official story of McDonald's starts with two brothers, Richard and Maurice McDonald, San Bernardino, California, 1940. The McDonald brothers opened a drive-in restaurant like many others at the time. Wide menu, car hops bringing food to the window, long wait times. But in 1948, they made a radical decision. They shut the restaurant down for 3 months, fired every employee, and when they reopened, they had completely transformed the business. No car hops, no long menu, just 9 items: burgers, fries, and milkshakes, low prices, brutal speed, and a production system inspired by factory assembly lines. They called it the Speedy Service System, and it worked better than they ever expected. By the early 50s, the McDonald Brothers restaurant was famous across California. Magazines wrote about them. Business owners drove from hundreds of miles away just to watch them operate. And that's when the man who actually changed everything showed up. Ray Kroc. In 1954, Ray Kroc was 52 years old. He'd spent his entire life selling things: paper cups, real estate, and at that point, milkshake machines. He'd never had his big break, never made the leap he always imagined, but he kept trying. One day, he got an unusual order. A small restaurant in San Bernardino had bought 8 milkshake machines from him. 8, when most restaurants bought 1 or 2. Kroc drove out to California, and what he saw stopped him cold. A line wrapping around the block, perfect operation, impossible speed, and customers coming back again and again. In that moment, Ray Kroc had a vision. He saw this restaurant, replicated in every city across America, on every major corner, at every highway exit, in every airport. He went to the McDonald brothers, pitched them on expanding through franchising, and in 1954, they signed a deal. Kroc became McDonald's franchise agent, with the right to sell licenses to operators across the country. But there was a problem, a massive problem. The franchise system Kroc had negotiated with the McDonald brothers was a financial disaster. Kroc collected just 1.9% of each franchise's sales, and out of that 1.9%, he had to give 0.5% back to the brothers. Do the math. For every $1 million a franchise brought in, Kroc kept $14,000. Out of that, he had to pay for offices, staff, travel, and all the costs of growing the network. By 1956, McDonald's had franchises across multiple states. Sales were growing, but Kroc was losing money, personally, every single month. He was 54 years old, diabetic, developing arthritis, and mortgaging his house to fund the expansion. It was at that moment of total desperation that an accountant named Harry Sonneborn walked into his office and said something that changed everything. "Ray, you're not in the burger business. You're in the real estate business." Harry Sonneborn was an accountant, not a visionary, not a famous entrepreneur, just a man with numbers who saw things with brutal clarity. And what he saw was this: McDonald's problem wasn't the food. It wasn't the operation. It wasn't the quality of the burgers. The problem was that Kroc didn't control the locations. When a franchisee signed with McDonald's, they leased or bought the property themselves. That meant the franchisee had power. They could walk away from the franchise, keep the location, and keep selling burgers under a different name. McDonald's had no real control over anything. Sonneborn's solution was simple and brilliant at the same time. McDonald's had to be the one leasing the land. McDonald's had to sign the contracts with property owners. And then, McDonald's had to sublease those locations to the franchisees. That way, if a franchisee didn't meet standards, if they didn't pay royalties, if they didn't follow the systems, McDonald's simply wouldn't renew the sublease, and the franchisee lost the location. Control shifted entirely to McDonald's. But there was more, much more. Sonneborn proposed creating a separate company, a company whose sole purpose was to acquire and lease properties for McDonald's. They called it Franchise Realty Corporation, and in 1956, they started executing the plan. The mechanism was elegant. McDonald's would identify a strategic location, a high-traffic corner, near a highway, in the center of a growing city. They'd negotiate a long-term lease with the property owner, typically 20 years, with renewal options. Then they'd build the restaurant or renovate the existing space. And finally, they'd sublease everything to the franchisee at a price that covered the original rent, plus a significant profit margin for McDonald's. The franchisee paid more than McDonald's paid the original owner. The difference was pure profit for the company, without selling a single burger. And over time, many of the properties McDonald's was leasing became direct company-owned assets. Today, McDonald's owns approximately 45% of the land and 70% of the buildings where its restaurants operate worldwide. We're talking about thousands upon thousands of properties in the most strategic locations of every city, every country, every continent. The estimated value of that real estate portfolio exceeds $40 billion. Now, let's talk numbers, because the numbers are where this gets really interesting. In 2023, McDonald's reported total revenues of approximately $23 billion. Of those $23 billion, less than $10 billion came from company-operated restaurants. The rest, more than $13 billion, came from franchises, specifically from two sources: royalties on sales and rent. And here's the number most people don't know. Of all the income McDonald's receives from franchisees, approximately 60% comes from rent, and only 40% from sales royalties. In other words, McDonald's makes more money as a property owner than as the owner of a fast food brand. And the difference in profitability is staggering. McDonald's company-operated restaurants, the ones it runs directly, have operating margins of around 15% to 20%. Franchise revenues, which include rent and royalties, carry operating margins of over 80%. 80%. For every $100 that comes in from rent and royalties, McDonald's keeps 80 as profit. And you know why the margins are so high? Because once the lease is signed, once the franchisee is operating, McDonald's barely has to do anything. It doesn't buy ingredients. It doesn't hire employees. It doesn't worry if beef prices spike or potato costs go up. It doesn't deal with angry customers. It just collects the rent every month for 20 years. It's the closest thing to free money that exists in the corporate world. But here's where the story gets a lot darker. Because this model, so brilliant for McDonald's, so profitable for investors, has another side. A side that franchisees know very well, and that rarely makes the headlines. What happens on the other side of that contract? What happens to the franchisee? To the person who puts in the work, the capital, and the risk? To open a McDonald's today, you need between $1 million and $2.3 million in upfront investment. That covers the franchise fee, equipment, renovations, and initial working capital. Then every month, you pay rent to McDonald's, between 8% and 15% of gross sales. You pay royalties, 4% of gross sales. You pay into the marketing fund, another 4% of gross sales. You pay employees, ingredients, utilities, maintenance. And after all of that, if things go well, if your restaurant sells at the system average, you walk away with a net profit of somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000 a year on an investment of $1.5 million. That's a return of between 7% and 13% annually, which isn't bad. But it's not exactly the deal of the century most people imagine when they see those golden arches. And there's something else most people don't calculate when they sign. McDonald's controls the menu prices. It can change operating standards. It can require expensive renovations. It can mandate new equipment purchases. All of that falls on the franchisee. In recent years, with inflation surging and labor costs climbing, McDonald's franchisees in the United States have been increasingly at odds with corporate. In 2023 and 2024, organized franchisee groups emerged, publicly questioning McDonald's decisions, rising costs, and shrinking margins. The model is brilliant for McDonald's, but for the franchisee, it's a deeply unequal power relationship. You put in the capital, you put in the work, you take on the risk, and McDonald's collects the rent, no matter what happens. So why am I telling you all this? Not just so you have something interesting to say next time you're waiting in the drive-thru. What McDonald's did is one of the purest examples of something the best businesses in the world do constantly. Separate the visible business from the real business. The burger is what customers see. The rent is what builds the wealth. And this isn't just McDonald's. Starbucks operates with similar logic. A significant portion of its income comes from licensing and lease arrangements. Subway, the largest fast food chain in the world by number of locations, runs almost entirely on franchising with property control baked in. And if you look beyond fast food, you see the same thing in hotels, gas stations, gym chains, convenience stores. The pattern is always the same. The brand is the hook. The property is the trap. And the contract is what guarantees the cash flow, whether the business is booming or struggling. Ray Kroc figured this out at 52, nearly broke, mortgaging his house, and built one of the most profitable empires in modern history. Not by selling burgers, but by collecting rent. Next time you see those golden arches, remember this. What you see on the surface is almost never the real business. McDonald's sells you a burger, but what it's really doing is charging you for the right to stand on its land. And that, at its core, is the most important lesson from this video. The most powerful businesses in the world don't make money doing what they appear to do. They make money by controlling something nobody else can take away. If you like this video, subscribe, because next week we're looking at another case just as fascinating as this one. A company that literally owns a piece of everything you buy, and almost nobody knows its name. Stay weird.